Take things in a different direction today as I begin a special 4-part podcast series on the presidents of the Republic of Texas. Yes, Texas was once its own country, and we're going to look at all 4 of those presidents. In this first episode, we're going to look at its shortest tenured president, David G. Burnet. Back for a short series we're going to do on presidents, but this time it's presidents from the Republic of Texas. I'm joined by Don Frazier, and we're going to have some fun exploring some little known and perhaps some known and some lesser known presidents of the great Republic of Texas. So, Don, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me.
Always glad to see you.
Don, we're going to start with probably one of the more lesser known ones because he was only president for 6 months, and that's David Burnet.
Oh, yeah, David G. Burnett's one of my faves.
He was president of the Republic of Texas from March 1836 to October 1836. He came from up north by way of Cincinnati. He fought, interestingly, he fought with Simon Bolivar.
He did. He was an early adopter of filibustering, etc. And during the Latin American Wars for Independence, he lent his sword to the Bolivarians down in Venezuela, and I think he fought in Chile, too. But the guys that he was backing split with Bolivar, so once there seemed to be some fissures amongst those revolutionary factions, he said, nah, maybe not, and ended up heading back to the States.
He came to Texas in 1826. He was what was then called an impresario because he got a land grant, but he was a failed impresario.
Yeah, but say he was an impresario until he wasn't. But he was also a fairly flinty Presbyterian, as I understand him as well. So he's a very complicated guy.
Well, on the grounds of Schreiner University, I think that's appropriate.
Flinty Presbyterians, huh?
Certainly the Presbyterian part. He was a part of the dialogue around the formation of the Republic of Texas and the splitting from Mexico, at least I was able to find as far back as 1833, in what they call consultations.
Correct.
You and I might call that a convention, but they called it a consultation. Why did they call it a consultation?
You know, a consultation means we're just talking about some stuff. But if you have a convention, that means we're deciding some stuff. And so it's all semantics. And it all has to do with, do we want to be a separate state within the Mexican Federation, or do we want to be an independent republic? With, of course, the unspoken addition of, which will then be quickly annexed to the United States. So consultation is kind of a smokescreen in a lot of ways, but it's all these factions kind of sizing each other up. Some that end up becoming known as Whigs, who are very pro-Mexican republic, although a federalist republic, while there's others that are very much for some sort of independence movement. So in the consultation, everybody's kind of circling each other. And finally they come up with an idea, well, we'll float this idea by the Mexican authorities of separate statehood within the Federal Republic of Mexico and see how it goes. Well, it goes poorly.
Well, in fact, they sent Stephen F. Austin.
Yeah, what better guy could you send? I mean, than Stephen F. Austin. I mean, he's everybody's pal.
And what happened to him when he got to Mexico City?
He got thrown in the clink, and the reason being is that he lost his temper. So, you know, usually even-tempered, even-handed Stephen F. Austin was so frustrated by the dysfunctional Mexican government, because by that time there had been coup and counter-coup and centralist factions fighting against federalist factions, and he went to Mexico City in good faith to try to say, look, how about you guys let us have a separate state, and we'll handle our own affairs, and we'll build Texas up, and all that great prosperity will go to the inurement of the Republic. And when he couldn't get that done and he couldn't convince anybody of the logic of his argument, he wrote kind of an unguarded note to a friend that said, you know, I'm not sure we can deal with these guys, in short. I'm clearly summarizing. But that friend turned that letter over to the authorities, who then decided that sounded a lot like sedition. And so he's actually on his way home when he gets kind of short-stopped and sent back to Mexico City for not even an all-expense paid trip to Mexico City, because he had to cover his own expenses of his own incarceration. So it was not good. He just, to me, I mean, Stephen F. Austin just didn't play it politic enough. But he expressed what came out of his mouth was the same frustration that many American settlers in Texas felt. So,
in an earlier podcast, we had the opportunity to talk about the impact of that arrest, both on Stephen F. Austin and, more importantly, on the Americans who were in Texas. So I don't really want to review that. I want to move forward to the convention of 1836.
Sure.
And here's where David Burnet shined.
He did.
And he, in many ways, gave the speech which caused the delegates to form the republic. Or did I get that wrong?
No, I think that's a pretty good representation of what goes on. So Burnet is not exactly he is not what I would call charismatic or particularly popular, but he is driven, and he has a very clear view of what he considers right and wrong. He's a real black and white sort of guy. And when he goes to Washington on the Brazos, while you have the convention trying to figure out, are we going to be independent? Are we going to try for a separate statehood within the federal Constitution, which is pretty much a dead letter by that point, but there's still some people waving that idea. When he shows up there, his initial goal is actually to rally support to go reinforce the Alamo. And he had read Travis's letter. He understood that he was one of the Americans in the world that Travis had addressed that letter to. And he was trying to get up a party to go and reinforce the Alamo. When he gets there, he's going, oh, man. You know what? These guys are in no way in any shape to get this whole movement going, much less reinforce the Alamo. And so he stays. And as he sees everybody kind of hemming and hawing and taking personal feuds into the public arena, you're right. He stands up, and I think he actually stands up on a table or a bench and says, look, we need to get this going. Well, let's get a government organized, and guess what? I will put my head through that noose as president if you're looking for somebody to take that step. And that was bold. So he's certainly courageous.
So there were three areas I thought he shined in his limited tenure as a president, although this one was before he became president when he gave that speech. But then the delegates were forced to evacuate.
Yeah, well, because he said, we better get out of here.
And because Santa Ana was, I believe, 60 miles away when they evacuated.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we now call the runaway scrape. But what I saw in that was a series of strategic retreats that he led, whether or not they were chaotic, whether or not it was with no purpose. But looking back now from the viewpoint of history, I saw him doing what had to be done, which was moving the government each time Santa Ana got relatively close, literally to the point where they were in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely right. So he helps the Declaration of Independence get signed, get that done. And then he says, look, we got to stick around. Let's go ahead and get the Constitution built. And then he says, bug out. Everybody go. We're going down to Harrisburg, which is essentially between Houston and Pasadena now. It's a great big refinery as far as I can tell. I don't know. You're from Houston. What's left in Harrisburg?
Nothing.
Yeah, well, about to say. I thought it was kind of a big industrial area. So he moved, said, all right, we're going to reestablish the government there. And when he leaves Washington on the Brazos, he starts taking criticism from Sam Houston. And he and Sam Houston will not be friends. And I'm not sure they were friends before that criticism. So he doesn't like Sam Houston because he's a cusser and a drinker. And that's just kind of at the visceral level. Forget his politics. This guy is a coarse barbarian. And David G. Burnet has principles. So he goes to Harrisburg.
Not a studied Presbyterian.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So he goes to Harrisburg, and then decides, no, this isn't safe enough. We'd better get going all the way to Galveston. And he goes to a place called Morgan's Point, or New Washington, and you can actually go there today. It's a fascinating part of kind of the greater LaPorte area in the south of Houston, southeast of Houston, right there at the ship channel. And so he went there. There's a rowboat waiting on him. He has his wife with him. They jump in the rowboat. He gets about 300 paces out to sea, and the Mexican dragoons actually show up. And Juan Almonte actually kind of calls his troops off because they're ready to smoke him. They're ready to just fire volleys into that boat as they're, oaring away from the shore. And David G. Burnet stood up in the rowboat and looked back at the Mexicans saying, look, if you're going to shoot somebody, shoot right here. But, my wife's over here, so aim high so you hit me and not her. And Almonte said, I don't think we need him that bad, to where all of a sudden we have a murdered woman on our hands too. So he gets away and ends up going down to Galveston. And that's where the government kind of idles. There's boats ready to take people away. In his saddlebags is the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, all the important papers. I mean, he's carrying them on his person. And he goes to Galveston and bides his time. And as he's waiting for the runaway order to go on to New Orleans by boat, of course, the Battle of San Jacinto happens. And the Mexican army is stopped, and everything that the Mexicans had hoped to achieve kind of falls apart.
And so the next place I thought he shone or shined was in his treatment of Santa Anna after Santa Anna's defeat. He took control of the peace negotiations, or the treaty negotiations, perhaps a better phrase, from Sam Houston. Could you pick it up from there?
Yeah, so Burnet is still in charge. Yeah, it's funny. It's Burnet, Texas, or David G. Burnet. But he takes that on because nobody else wants to deal with it. Besides, Houston is in danger. I mean, he took a bullet wound at San Jacinto that had gone septic, and he was evacuated to New Orleans, and people feared for his life. But if you know anything about Sam Houston, which you will later on, there wasn't a bullet made that could kill the guy. So David G. Burnet is then left with the task of dealing with Santa Anna and getting some sort of agreement between the upstart Republic of Texas and whatever the government is in Mexico at the time. So he relocates him to Velasco. And there's a lot of people very mad at this. That, look, he's our prisoner. We get to do with him what we shall. And what we shall is we would like to hang him immediately. And he said, no. That's not how we're going to do it. Let's take him down to Velasco. Let's put him in captivity there on a boat, schooner that's anchored out there in the mouth of the Brazos, and we will get him to guarantee Texas independence. He's a lot more valuable alive than dead. Boy, that did not go over well. But what he does get is a treaty, such as it is. I mean, there's probably a legal term for signing a document with a gun to your head. I'm not sure exactly what that is. It's
duress.
Yeah, it may be under duress. I thought there'd be a fancy Latin phrase that goes with it. But Santa Anna says, great, you guys are an independent republic. We'll withdraw all of our troops south of the Rio Grande. This will be ratified by the government in Mexico. Y'all can ratify it by whatever y'all are calling it, government. Burnet says, great. Now what we need to do with Santa Anna is we need to send him back to Mexico to make sure this gets done, to see it all the way through. Puts him on the boat, says, all right, sailing orders, let's go. And at about that point, there is a mob led by Thomas Jefferson Green, North Carolinian, who's known for being a hothead, showed up and said, we want your prisoner. It's time to shoot him now. he served his purpose. We're going to get him now. And David G. Burnet protected his life and kept Santa Anna on the boat. They didn't let the boat sail off, but he also didn't let the lynch mob kill him. And that preserves Santa Anna to fight another day, and he'll have a long and interesting career after this. I mean, he is president of Mexico 11 times and dies peacefully in bed, which is surprising to me. But David G. Burnet engineered that situation and navigated a very, very volatile situation effectively, and ended up with a Treaty of Alaska that nobody recognized. But the Republic of Texas was there, at least could claim some sort of legitimacy from that event.
Then we move to the fall of 1836. Sam Houston returns.
Yeah.
There's a Republic-wide election. Sam Houston is elected president, and he goes to the Capitol to take over. And the current president, David G. Burnet, really doesn't. He's not too enthusiastic about turning things over to Sam Houston. So there's a little kerfuffle before David G. Burnet turns the government over. Could you maybe say?
Well, there's a lot of name calling is what there is, and they call each other, all sorts of names. Long and short of it is, David G. Burnet says Sam Houston's a dissipated drunk, half-wild Indian, and Sam Houston says, that David G. Burnet has absolutely nothing but rocks for brains, So at least I'm not stupid. I may be a half-wild Indian, but at least I'm not ignorant like you. Anyhow, they keep from killing each other, but Sam Houston had showed up prematurely. He was not supposed to take over until December, and this is only in October. But finally, David G. Burnet says, I'm done, and he resigns. So Sam Houston gets to start his first term early. But they are going to cross paths several times politically from that point on. I mean, that's the thing about Burnet, is that he is around forever. I mean, he lives to 82, and so he goes through not only the Republic of Texas period, but all the way through the Civil War and into the post-Civil War period.
So those three things that I thought Burnet really shone on. One was at the convention. Two was when he moved the government timely enough to avoid capture. But three, by preserving the life of Santa Anna. Santa Anna did get to fight another day, but I thought that spoke well of him seeing the role Santa Anna had to play in the negotiations, but also I thought that probably helped give a little credibility to the Republic of Texas if they didn't up and willy-nilly execute Santa Anna.
Absolutely. That would have been a terrible, terrible optic, if nothing else. And Burnet did other things to help the Republic of Texas be born. I mean, he had connections in Cincinnati, for instance. His brother was the mayor of Cincinnati and made a gift of a pair of cannon to the revolutionary forces. So that was the twin sisters, and that was a useful addition, and it becomes part of the legend and lore of the creation of Texas. So he is not. He had connections, and they were different connections than, say, Sam Houston's people or other major players in that Texas Revolution. He was also good friends with Sidney Sherman, which was surprising to me. Sidney Sherman and David G. Burnet would end up living together in Galveston later on in Burnet's life. So it's there are factions that people formed during this time period, and Burnet represented one vision for Texas, whereas people like Sam Houston was another vision.
And that was one of the themes I got from studying Burnet was exactly that, the factions starting as far back as should we be independent or should we be a state within a federal republic. Later on, we saw a very robust pro-slave, anti-Indian policy.
You bet.
With Sam Houston, who had a much more tolerant policy. So those themes were one. But the other thing that struck me was how personal politics was. And I mean, not going to the writers or news correspondents dinner and getting insulted. I mean, saying it to your face.
Oh, yeah, they would absolutely say it to your face, and you would think that these people would end up fighting it out to the death. There was one exchange between Houston and Burnet in which everybody just knew there was going to be a duel. And, I demand satisfaction. Well, let's just throw down and stab each other now. And Sam Houston, surprisingly, came back and said, you know what? A duel would do no good because I'm pretty sure all the people are sick of both of us. So unless we both killed each other, I don't think the people will be satisfied with a duel anyway. So,
and then really sort of the swing of parties who had influence. So David Burnet, Sam Houston, then we're going to talk about Sam Houston, and then after Sam Houston, Mirabeau B. Lamar, and once again, mirroring what we see today over the past 20 years.
There's absolutely nothing new under the sun, man. That's straight up Ecclesiastes. And so, we think about how vicious politics are now. We watch State of the Union, watch people, cut a fool right there on national TV. The only thing missing between that and the Republic of Texas was TV. If we'd have had cameras rolling, it would have been entertaining. It would absolutely have been great reality TV. But Burnet had this absolute, he outlasted people, which is remarkable to me, against a number of adversities. I mean, he lost his wife, he lost his son, he had another son that died in the very last days of the Civil War. But he was still plugging along the whole time. It is remarkable. But tell you what a man of principle he is. One of the early stories about him coming to Texas was that he had come in from New Orleans on a schooner, and the schooner had been involved in a storm, or I can't remember if it went aground. Something bad happened. They had to jettison everything off that boat, all their personal possessions except for one thing, and that was a steam engine. Then he was determined to go to Texas to start a sawmill using this steam engine. And he gets there, gets ready to set up shop. Under Mexican law at the time, he was allocated an additional piece of property. But in order to get that benefit, he had to be Catholic. They said, "Oh, I can't, that's just something way too far." And so he ends up having to sell this steam engine that he had nursed all the way to Texas at a massive loss over principle. And so part of the thing that rubs people backwards about Burnet is that he is fairly inflexible when it comes to principle. He believes it, that settles it. And one of the things that he was involved with as in the government of Mirabeau B. Lamar was he was pretty hard on the Indians. In fact, was probably a participant, if I remember correctly, in the Battle of the Neches, in which Chief Bowles was killed, and the Cherokees were in Shawnees, and all the other immigrant tribes were driven out of East Texas. So he was not willing to even compromise on maybe these guys have a claim as much as mine to Texas. No, those guys got to go, and that's the kind of guy he was.
Well, Don, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us back. For our next episode, we're going to take up the first term of Sam Houston.
Awesome.
This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this part one of our special 4-part podcast series on presidents of the Republic of Texas. Join us again next time where we visit about Sam Houston in his first term as president of the Republic of Texas. I've linked to Don Frazier and the Texas Institute in the show notes, so check both of those out. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to visiting with you again.